was an actor and then a director. I went to NYU, Tisch School of the Arts, the Experimental Theater Wing. I later trained with the great William Esper, who died last year, and was at his studio as a teacher until 2015, learning the Meisner work in depth. And then in 2015, branched off to start my own studio in Brooklyn at Sunset Park. I'm a dad. I heard someone Colleen was talking about watering her plants. I have a garden. I got some raspberry bushes. And I'm happy to be here and happy to take your questions and hope we have a great conversation. I went to the Experimental Theater Wing, and my teacher there was a wonderful Israeli teacher and director named Rina Yerushalmi. She'd gone to Carnegie Mellon, and we were mostly doing Grotowski work, and I'd also been to Circle in the Square, which was sort of a hybrid of the method and Stella Adler. And honestly, I'd never heard of Meisner, which is weird because he was alive and kicking at the time. I graduated from NYU and was doing a scene one week, and it went very well. And then the next week I was working on another scene and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And that frightened me. The inconsistency of that. I had started my training at NYU, as so many actors do, with scene study. My first day in class at NYU, we were doing Streetcar Named Desire and Death of a Salesman and all the great classics. And that's how I thought you trained. And you learn how to do those scenes, but you don't necessarily get anything foundational. And so right when I got this big panic of not knowing what I was doing, I was working backstage at La Mama, the wonderful off-Broadway theater in the East Village, and a play Rena was directing. And her boyfriend at the time, a wonderful actor named Joel Rooks, was the star of that show. And so I saw him every night, and every night, like an Olympic gymnast, he just stuck that role. It was beautiful, it was rich, it was emotional, it was clear, the character work was there. And every night it was a little different because he was improvising, but everything was solid. I went, wow, I want to do that. And he said, well, you know, my teacher's Bill Esper, and he taught me everything I know. And so I just reached out to Bill the next day, and Bill said, yeah, it's a 2-year program. And I just graduated from a 4-year program. And I didn't think twice. I just said, so as a graduate from NYU, you know, where would I start? He said, at the beginning. I said, well, you know, but as a graduate from NYU, where would I start? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, at the beginning, because that's where everyone starts in this work, because we don't know where the holes are. And it was the best 2 years of my life, and it really answered all my questions. What I love about it is that, first of all, it's immensely practical. You know, it's not mysterious. I mean, there is a kind of a mystery to talent, but it's quite practical. And it is foundational. Meisner was also a musician. He was a member of the group theater with Clifford Odets and Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, all those wonderful people. But he also was a pianist. And so he understood the value of scales. And we didn't really have an equivalent of scales. You know, dancers don't start doing Swan Lake. They start at the bar and with plie in first position. And nobody starts the piano with a Chopin nocturne. They start with scales. But actors start with scene study, which if you think about it, doesn't make any sense. And so the Meisner work starts with this very basic idea of what we call the repetition exercise, where we would put our attention on our partner and notice something about them that caught our interest and start the repetition with that. Like, that's a nice dress you're wearing today. And they would say back to me, that's a nice dress you're wearing today. And we'd go back and forth. And now that doesn't seem very interesting. It's not Chekhov. But it's the seed of Chekhov, because it immediately sets you up, first of all, to take your attention off yourself. That's huge, because that's the worst place for your attention to be if you're an actor. Put your attention on your partner, on listening, and how important it is. We'd say, if you're a good actor, you got to be a good listener. So it really cultivates quality, deep, nuanced listening. And it also starts to cultivate, I'm touching my chest here, but a sort of inquiry into the self, like, my attention's on you, but then you say it back to me. And for a moment, it goes back on myself. And I go, how do I feel about that? And you start to get really interested in your truthful response, which means not your social response. You know, in life, we got to be careful. We can't say everything we feel to authority figures or our parents or our teachers or our bosses. But the Meisner work is inviting you to say everything. It's an exercise in subtext. And then we start to move into what we call crafting with imaginary circumstances. And it's just so methodical how it builds, building block by building block, a technique that for me set up a very solid floor that I could jump on and was available to me and made my work so reliable. And it just worked well for me. And I think I've taught at this point several thousand students because I also taught at NYU. And it seems to work really well for a lot of people. So it's very practical and it's very rich. It's amazing for film because of that idea of being spontaneous, being in the moment, really working off your partner, take after take after take. So you're not doing canned work. And it works for any material. It works for plays, it works for TV, it works for film, works for new work. I'm in love with it. And I think Meisner was a genius. We call this body, mind, spirit of ours our instrument. Like a cello or like a piano. And if you're a pianist, you got to be able to play all 88 keys of a piano. And as an actor, we have the idea that all the colors, all the human colors live inside us. But when you grow up, all kinds of things happen that create defenses so that we could stay alive. So if you had a very authoritarian, domineering father who said, "Don't you raise your voice to me," you might be a little shy about aggression or about conflict. Or if you had a very religious household that you grew up in, and when you were having sexual thoughts and feelings, which are very natural as we grow up, and someone said, "Don't be so dirty," you might be a little blocked in that area. So defenses that we create to stay alive, which are very useful, defenses are useful, can ultimately get in the way of the freedom of an actor. I mean, I've had classes where a lot of people are conflict avoidant, and conflict is the soul, the heart and soul of drama. Without conflict, you don't have a drama, right? I want something and the other person wants something else, and we have a conflict, and that creates the drama. So if you don't love conflict, it's hard to be an actor. So you have to retrain the actor to know that the imaginary world is a safe place. Meisner used to say the imaginary world was like a padded cell. Even if you wanted to hurt yourself, you couldn't. You know, you could run 1,000 miles an hour into the wall, and in a padded cell, nothing's going to happen. And the same thing happens. Like the worst that can happen to you as an actor in the imaginary world is that you'll have an experience. And it's different rules. Like in a play, you might get cancer and die, but then you take a bow. In life, if you get cancer and die, you're not coming back. And so the safety and the freedom of that kind of needs to be offered again and again to certain actors, because they go back to these old defenses. So that's one of the blocks. And it could be different for each actor. It could be about intimacy. It could be about authority. It could be about so many things. Then other things that come up are a lot of actors have the misconception that acting is about emotion. And so they try to feel while they're on stage, which is really trying to do your homework while you're acting, and that doesn't work. Acting is about doing. That's why it's called acting. It's action. And you put your attention on the doing. And if you understand why you're doing it, the meaning of it will come to life. And as James Dean said, you never show. Like actors say, "How do I show this feeling?" Don't show it. If you have it, we won't miss it. Make sure you have it, but don't try to show it. So those are some things. And then the other thing is actors worry about results. So I've found when I go to plays that one of the worst performances is closing night, because the actors are sometimes trying to make up for some things that they never got to, and it's not as organic. And so actors sometimes worry about results quite a bit instead of just really doing the process and trusting that the results will take care of themselves. Meisner had a book that he loved called Zen and the Art of Archery, which was about a guy who learned how to do archery with a Zen master in Japan, an archery master. And he learned how to do it by focusing not on the result. The result is a bullseye. But instead of focusing on the bullseye, he focused on his breath. He focused on pulling back the string of the bow. He focused on looking at the target. And by focusing on all that, at first his archery was terrible, but then it started to become consistent. And so in the training, we're really trying to achieve results because we want to do good work, great work, wonderful work, meaningful work by focusing on the process. And that's a hard thing to trust. It could. I mean, I think that improvisation is the heart and soul of performance. Um, and so the exercises that we do are training us to improvise, which means we're not really planning anything. We're set up, we know who we are, but then we're working off the other person so that the work becomes very spontaneous. Yeah, Second City, UCB. I would say that that's cool stuff. That frees you up. There's a little bit of a trap in that there's behind that sometimes the idea that if you don't get a laugh, it's not working. Like UCB, that's not what they're trying to do, but a lot of people have that misconception that, oh, it wasn't a good improv because nobody laughed. And we don't have any kind of audience results in what we're doing. But yes, absolutely, being flexible, being in the moment, letting what comes up, being ready for anything. Bill Esper always used to say this quote about Dustin Hoffman, that he said he would sacrifice anything in his performance for a moment of spontaneity, which means because he did a lot of plays, and if he had a moment in a play that night after night brought the house down, so it's a killer moment, if something else is happening, he's going to go there and sacrifice that killer moment. I mean, think about when an actor makes an accident happen on stage. Like, it doesn't make it happen, it just happen. Like, they knock over the cup. The audience is like, what's he going to do with the cup? He's going to pick up the cup? That wasn't planned. And it's always disappointing when an actor kind of just plows through with their blocking and doesn't pay attention to the cup. And it's thrilling when they pick up the cup and put it back out right there. I remember when Most Def and Jeffrey Wright were doing Susan Laurie Parks's Top Dog Underdog on Broadway. Wonderful, deep, meaningful play. And one night, somebody in the house, their cell phone went off, and without breaking anything, Jeffrey Wright just turned and said, "Man, put the damn cell phone away. We were trying to do some work here." And it was arresting because he was right in the moment and then went right back to the text. So I think all good actors have to be great improvisers. Well, that's the classical Meisner journey. The first year is all about you and no character. So you under various imaginary circumstances, but as you, with using the word if as the door into the imaginary world. What if I won the lottery? What if my agent dropped me? What if I found out I was sick? What if I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me? And then living that out. So that we really open up the instrument. And the second year is all about character work and transformation and telling other people's stories as versions of us. And part of that, which came from Meisner, is I actually have the book here, Spoon River Anthology. Edgar Lee Masters, who was a poet, sort of a turn of the century poet, wrote a series of poems about a fictional place sort of in the Midwest where he was from called Spoon River. And each of those poems is a different character from that place. And the idea is that they're all dead. And it's sort of like, if I had 5 minutes to come back to earth and say something, what would I say and who would I say it to? So they're monologues for the most part, and they're character pieces. And they get at, they're very useful to work on, and we spend, gosh, about 3-4 weeks on them in the second year. And the student picks them with my blessing, only because some of those speeches are a little bit harder to act, and some of them are very funny, and some of them are very angry, and some of them are very spiritual, and some of them are really upsetting. And they pick the one that really attracts them, and then they start to work on that. And one of the things that comes out of is an idea of the active meaning of a speech, sort of a phrase that's the key issue of the speech. Can I swear on this thing, or what's the story? Maybe not. I won't. I'll say free.
It's all good.
Yeah. So there's
lots of people.
Yeah, there's a character named Rosie Roberts who's a very defiant hooker, and if you boil her speech down, it means nobody fucks with me. And so as the actor's working on it, maybe every other line they just kind of say that again. That's the active meaning of the speech. Or another one named Harry Wilmans, who's protesting injustice. As he's working through the speech and rehearsing it, the active meaning of that speech is, how dare you? The action is to protest an injustice, and the essential active meaning is, how dare you? And as you work through that speech, you might go, I was a young man, how dare you? And my father came and told me about it, how dare you? And that starts to activate and sort of magnetize you in the speech to that essential meaning. The other thing we use the Spoon River for, which is so powerful and such a great rehearsal technique, is what we call an actor's paraphrase, where, let's say, the speech has 14 lines, and it has a certain narrative structure. You come up with your version of that speech that matches it in form and content, but it might not be the identical content, it's the essential content. So there's a guy named Fiddler Jones. It's a very joyous speech about a guy who never made any money, but boy was he happy because every day he got to play his fiddle, his violin. Now maybe when you play with that, it might be about acting. And so you're going to change the content in your paraphrase to be talking about, God, I wouldn't care if I got paid, but when I got to do a reading with my friends at Actors Connection, it made me feel alive, and all that kind of stuff. And that starts to connect you to the essential meaning of the speech, which then you'll start to go back to the text, and hopefully that meaning and that behavior will stay. So they're very powerful for something that was written over 100 years ago. Very useful, very universal. Yeah, I had a group therapist named Lou Ormont, who was such a mentor to me. He died in 2010. And he always was saying, run towards the cannons, which means take risks, move in the direction of risk, go to your edge, keep taking chances, obviously healthy chances. That doesn't mean, do parkour on the top of a building, but it means that part that scares you, go for it. That choice that scares you, why not? And so I love that idea of running towards the cannons. And then the other one would be that every problem is an opportunity, and the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. Well, I took a short stop on the way into directing. I was an actor, and then one day I had the opportunity to direct something, and I realized I loved it because when I was an actor, I always wanted to give people notes, and it wasn't my business, tell them what their blocking should be, and I wanted to control everything, and that's not your place as an actor. So when I got to direct, it was like, ooh, I get to tinker with everything and really do the big picture. And then I discovered rather quickly, as Ted Slabensky says, the theater pays you in hugs, and that's as actors. In directors, you get maybe a pat on the back. It's very hard to make a living as a director, as a theater director, unless you're like Joe Mantello and you've got a bunch of shows running on Broadway, or Julie Taymor. And so you have to find some other way to make a living. And one of those would be to work at a theater, like the Public Theater, in their literary department, or as an assistant artistic director. One would be a lot of guys were doing soap opera directing, which I tried, and it just wasn't a good fit. And the other would be to teach. So I started teaching as an idea to supplement my directing. It was really just to support that. And then I fell in love with it. And what I fell in love with was helping people to discover the journey that the Meisner work gave me, which was like all these ahas and all of a sudden, oh, I know what to do. And so helping someone, it really feels like I'm a midwife. I mean, I'm giving information, but I'm really helping people birth their talent. The soap opera was guiding light. Someone just asked me. And funny, on that day, Ian Ziering of Beverly Hills 90210 fame was a young 17-year-old, 16-year-old kid on that soap. And then he went on to that, and then of course, Sharknado. But teaching really lets me help people find their potential and give them something that's been so meaningful for me, and share it. It's great to pass it on because it's part of our lineage and part of our theatrical history, and it works. So I love teaching, but I didn't start out to be a teacher. In fact, I had a teacher at NYU who was very harsh. An acting teacher, with one word, can with the if it's the wrong word at the wrong time can really do some damage to a student. And I saw this teacher being very harsh to one of my classmates, and just thinking about it hurts my heart right now. And I was like, wow, that is a lot of responsibility. I don't know if I could be a teacher, because what if I say the wrong thing? And in fact, sometimes things I say get taken the wrong way. They're never intended that way, but sometimes it's hard to understand for the student where I'm coming from, or maybe I say it in an insensitive way. And then we have to talk about that and repair things. So it's a big responsibility. No, you're not going to change yourself to fit that part. You're going to find the parts of yourself that fit that part, right? Like acting, I always think of acting sort of like a mixing board with all those sliders that they have at like concerts or recording studios. And you're always transforming yourself and remaking yourself to play every part. I mean, look at Daniel Day-Lewis, look at all the great character actors, look at Cate Blanchett. Who knows what they're really like as people? We just know that they find the things in them that sync up with the part. So like if you were going to play, if you were, let's say you were a really bold person like Mia Hamm, a soccer player, and brassy and outspoken, and you get an audition for Glass Menagerie for Laura, the opposite of you, the opposite. Laura is introverted, she's shy, she has low self-esteem, she has a domineering mother that scares her. Well, you're going to dial down the brassy, assertive parts of you and dial up the parts of you that can understand from an empathetic point of view what it's like to feel like you're not good enough, what it's like to be shy, what it's like to be that. And if you can find those in you, then you're in business. And then then don't do that the next part. The next part, hopefully, I think the worst thing in acting for me would be to have a recurring role for 18 years. That would take out all the fun of acting. The fun of acting is playing all these different parts and getting to live out bad guys and good guys and scared guys and bold guys and winners and losers. And hopefully all those parts of us, because we have empathy in us and we can see the world and feel the world, and the world lives inside us, it's a microcosm, we can play any part, hopefully. Not literally any part, but a whole bunch of them. When you see someone shake off the shackles and the chains that have kept them contained and step into something powerful, vulnerable, open, it's thrilling, and it's thrilling for the class. So that happens all the time. I mean, I'm thinking in particular, it doesn't come out of any one moment, but it was sort of a turn in the corner. I had a wonderful Puerto Rican student who was an attorney, a little bit older, and was successful as an attorney, but had kind of a bucket list dream to be an actor. And when she came into the class, I mean, I was a little wondering, is this going to work out? Because there was something so tight and repressed and held. And, it's just a completely different use of her than being an attorney. But she kept coming to class, and she started taking the movement work at my studio, which is the Lloyd Williamson work. And it's an incredible faculty, Nate Flower, Julia Crockett, Kana Satow, and at the time, Mackie Bauman, and voice. And she just like kept at it, and like a swan, she just emerged. And God, it gives me chills just thinking about her journey and the success of that. And that's just thrilling. I love that story. And so many students do that on a daily basis. And you live for that. And the class lives for that because it's inspiring. We haven't been there since March, but we're roaring to get back when it's safe to get back. But we are online. It's a Meisner-based studio, so it's a conservatory, and we're trying to basically offer an affordable alternative to an MFA program. Um, so it's not a studio that's built on workshops, although we have some of those, but more on this sort of long form training of the 2-year Meisner technique, as handed down to me by Bill Esper and Maggie Flanagan, and is handed down to them by Sanford Meisner. And then we have like a third year program that's about the business, that's about working on camera, that's about branding once you know how to act. That's a 10-week program. But as a conservatory, you know, we train the whole instrument. So if you went to NYU or Yale or Juilliard, you'd be working on your voice, you'd be working on your body, you'd be working on freeing everything up and finding resonance and learning phonetics and all that. And since you're going to be competing in the marketplace with people who went to those great conservatories, if you're smart, you're going to get the same skills in the same toolbox. So most people who come there do what we call the conservatory program, which is acting twice a week, movement twice a week, and voice twice a week. And we also do some wonderful supplementary classes. We have clowning, we have Alexander work, we have Michael Chekhov work. We have some more commercially based things like voiceover and commercial acting and advanced on camera. And I do a master class for actors who are already trained, who don't necessarily have the Meisner vocabulary, but they went someplace else and they're working actors. And we work hard and we play hard and we have a great community. Um, we've been doing readings while we've been on quarantine. We're about to do another one of Anna Devere Smith's Twilight Los Angeles. Um, we we did a weird faculty reading of the second episode of The Tiger King, which we did a transcript of, and all the faculty got into costume. That was fun. Um, it's a very engaged school and a very special school, and we say that we're training the passionate actor committed to excellence. So if you're a hobbyist, we're probably not the right place. But if you're all in on being good, we believe that if you're good, your career will happen. If you're focusing on, like, we don't like students to audition, and sometimes we get pushback and say, yeah, but what about, say, we're probably not the right school for you, because if you're going to Yale, you're not auditioning, you're training. And we believe that this is an investment in your talent. And then after 2 years, we say, go do it, and you'll be ready to do it. So it's really for people who are focused on being the best actor they can be. And if that's you, I think it's a great place. The first thing for me is reading the room. You know, it's very important that a teacher is sort of feeling the energy of what's happening in the room. And when it's just a bunch of Zoom boxes, I have to really, you know, focus in on what's happening. And so it takes more attention on my part and more engagement. I mean, oh, Bob, you're leaning back there. What's going on? Come on in. And like, it's kind of a constant gathering in and monitoring of everyone there to make sure we're all going forward together. In terms of the work itself, there were some things to figure out, which we learned as we did it. Like, oh, we figured out that it makes sense that, because we work in pairs, so when we're talking with each other, everyone has their video on. And then when it's just the people who are working, everyone turns their video off so that we just see the two actors, and each of them are pinning each other so that, and turning off their self view so that all they see is the partner. I'm not doing a good job of this, but one of the ways to do the work is look at the camera. We're used to looking at faces. So, but if I look at your face, then you're not going to see me looking at the camera. So look at the camera and listen with your ears to what's being said. That's a little bit, that takes a little bit of getting used to. Some things are less satisfying, like kissing and dancing. That's not as easy, but even if an actor kind of leans into the camera and sort of goes to kiss something, or those kind of match cuts when I hand you the glass of water and then you take it in your frame, those are kind of fun. But we've done some scenes with kissing and we've done some scenes with dancing, and we find that. And sometimes there's even an advantage, like this close-up. I mean, I'm seeing the pores on actors' faces in ways that I wouldn't see if we were in person. And even the class is seeing me, because normally I'd be at the front row and they'd be behind me in rows. So they might see the back of my head or me in profile, but they're actually watching me giving feedback. And that makes it more immediate for them as well. So there's pluses and minuses, but for the most part, it's worked out very well. And even some actors have really blossomed in this time because they feel so comfortable in their own space, and that lets them, and they're private, they don't have people around them, and they can find a sense of privacy, and then they really emerge. So I've got a bunch of actors who've, after 2 years of training, their best work came in these 3 months, and that was surprising and great. But students are kind of going like, why do I want to pay all that money to train in my living room? And that's an understandable, thing. But then I say, so what are you going to do? Because when they say that we're on pause, we're not on pause. The time is marching on. And as one of my colleagues at Carnegie Mellon said, do not let this time be an excuse for what you did not accomplish, right? This is a perfect time to invest in your talent because there's not a lot of work happening. And so what a great time to train. If you have the choice between training and not training, I'd go for that. And even if it's online, I know there'll be value if you got the right class. Don't look at the person here because the camera is usually a little bit higher. Don't be acting like this. Like sometimes people are sort of, because this compresses your spine and all that. So if you're doing a scene, like we just did some scenes and some of them, the actors are standing, put your laptop or your device on a chair that's on top of a table so that it's at the right level. On-camera acting happens here. So when I go here, you've lost me. So it's starting to train you to, not to be tight, but just to know at what point do I stop being effective in terms of what the camera is going to pick up. And if I'm over here, is that good? If I'm crossing the line, I'm over here, is that good? And you sort of get to play with it and see what works. And it's helpful to have some feedback about that. I think shouting is a little bit tricky because the microphones sometimes clip and jam up. So when students are screaming at each other, it kind of seems to overwhelm the microphones that they're working with, and then that becomes a little harsh in the ears. I think these kinds of things are good as opposed to just using the sound coming from your device, headphones, or I've got a little Bluetooth set of headphones that I also use that are helpful. And don't lean in so much. I think from here up is a good thing. Yeah. Well, I think the Meisner technique is a very complete technique. So then what classes would be helpful would be just to give you like a gym to practice in. So like a scene study class, which we call a master class. So several times a year, I do a master class here. I did one in Atlanta in February. I typically do one in LA every year. And that's a chance for you to, 12 people in a class. It's a 4-hour class. And you've been working on your scene already for like a week to 10 days with your partner. So you usually come in blocked with accents, off book, and then we just start to make it better. So I think any good scene study class would be the best way just to give you a chance to practice it.
Excellent. Yeah.
And then you could also take, inventory, because if you need to work on your voice and speech, if you don't have any dialects, if you're kind of tight in your body, there are other things you could do to sort of just support whatever part of your instrument needs developing. So we've had a faculty member gave birth, and just during the pandemic, one of my actors' wives had a baby, which was really cool because the baby was online with us like the day of. That wouldn't have happened if we were in person. And the year before, a wonderful actor who came from UCB, Chris Weiner, had a baby. And in my second year at Esper, one of my classmates had a baby, and it ended up, they took 2 or 3 weeks off. You got to have a very understanding partner if you're the mom. And you got to be a very understanding partner if you're the dad. But you take a little bit of time off and then you get back to it. And I was lucky. My son was born in August when we were on vacation, so it didn't take me away from any of the work. And then I got right back to it. I took the spring off. NYU had the Paid Parents Leave Act. And so I took the spring off with pay, which is a great deal if you can get that, so that my wife could go back to work and I could spend more time in his 6th through 8th or 9th months. Um, but spend as much time with the kid as you can, but it's also useful to work on your craft when you can. And your kid will be your best teacher, much better than me. The best coaching for me is when they already have the job. When you coach someone for an audition, it's paying a lot of money to try something that even if you're the best one they saw, they may not give you the part. So that's a little bit tricky. But we're always just, we're looking for to put that actor's stamp on the material. And so I'm doing script analysis with them and then seeing if we can unlock some fun, some ideas, some imagination. That's not the way everyone would do that part. Um, and it's never planned. I just let my own imagination kind of roam, and those actors trust me to play with them a little bit, and we get some ideas. Sam did a movie called The Way Way Back, and he tells this story. But at one point, I said, "Ooh, why don't you just sing that line?" And he said, "You mean like just now in rehearsal?" I said, "No, when they on the day." I said, "What?" Because it's not written that the character should sing the line. I said, "Well, just try it," and that's in the film. And another in Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which he won the Oscar for. He plays kind of a mama's boy, and Frances McDormand has a scene with him in a bar where she's sort of dominating him and is alpha in him. And when we were playing around with it, the line is something like "my mama," blah blah blah, and Sam just like I went and Sam stuttered and went my mama. I said, keep that. That's great. And so that's in the film. That intentional stutter, which kind of clearly emblemizes what the character's insecurities. So there are a lot of accidents that happen in rehearsal, and then we have fun with those. Well, first of all, be proud. Be proud to be an actor. We live in a culture that does not necessarily value art. We're how many people, people sometimes say to actors if they haven't seen them for a while, "Hey, are you still acting?" And that's so hurtful. I mean, would they say that to a doctor? You still being a doctor? And so be proud and know how important what we do, what you do is. At 9/11, after 9/11, as we were kind of pulling ourselves together as New Yorkers, E.L. Doctorow, the wonderful novelist who wrote Ragtime, was talking to an auditorium full of people at NYU and said, artists have always been on the front lines, and we are also rescue workers, not just the EMS and the police and the fire department. And we tell stories, and stories are important. And so I urge you to be proud. Be proud to be an actor. It's a noble profession. It's a hard profession. It's hard to do it well. It's hard to have the thick skin to face all the rejection that we get. I mean, we're constantly unemployed if we're actors. And stay playful and try to collect what's happening now, because this is a special time in all kinds of ways. And important stories are going to come out of it, and you're going to be the storytellers, and do it with heart and with love. Do it with love.